23rd July 2025. Section 13 in Liber Primus, first volume, the red book entitled Resolution. There's an image depicting a scene in the fantasy which follows. December 25, 1913. On the third night, deep longing to continue experiencing the mysteries seized me. The struggle between doubt and desire was great in me. But suddenly I saw that I stood before a steep ridge in a wasteland. It is a dazzling bright day. I catch sight of the prophet high above me. His hand makes an averting movement, and I abandon my decision to climb up. I wait below, gazing upward. I look. To the right, it is dark night. To the left, it is bright day. The rock separates day and night. On the dark side lies a big black serpent. On the bright side, a white serpent. They thrust their heads toward each other, eager for battle. Elijah stands on the heights above them. The serpents pounce on one another, and a terrible wrestling ensues. The black serpent seems to be stronger. The white serpent draws back. Great billows of dust rise from the place of struggle. But then I see. The black serpent pulls itself back again. The front part of its body has become white. Both serpents curl about themselves, one in light, the other in darkness. In the 1925 seminar, Jung said, a few evenings later, I felt that things should continue, so again I tried to follow the same procedure, but it would not descend. I remained on the surface. Then I realized that I had a conflict in myself about going down, but I could not make out what it was. I only felt that two dark principles were fighting each other, two serpents. He then recounted the fantasy that ensued. Elijah, what did you see? I saw the fight of two formidable serpents. It seemed to me as if the black would overcome the white serpent, but behold, the black one withdrew, and its head and the top part of its body had turned white. Elijah, do you understand that? I have thought it over, but I cannot understand it. Should it mean that the power of the good light will become so great that even the darkness that resists it will be illuminated by it? Elijah climbs before me into the heights, to a very high summit. I follow. On the peak, we come to some masonry made of huge blocks. It is a round embankment on the summit. In the 1925 seminar, Jung added, I thought, this is a druidic sacred place. It is a round embankment on the summit. Inside lies a large courtyard, and there is a mighty boulder in the middle, like an altar. The prophet stands on this stone and says, This is the temple of the sun. This place is a vessel that collects the light of the sun. Elijah climbs down from the stone. His form becomes smaller in descending and finally becomes dwarf-like, unlike himself. I ask, Who are you? I am mine, and I will show you the well springs. Sorry. I am mime, capital M-I-M-E. I am mime, with a footnote. In Wagner's The Ring of the Nibelung, the Nibelung dwarf, Mime, is the brother of Alberich, or Alberich, and a master craftsman. Alberich stole the Rhine-Gold stone from the Rhine maidens. Through renouncing love, he was able to forge a ring out of it that conferred limitless power. Sauron. Through renouncing love, he was able to forge a ring out of it that conferred limitless power. That's the brother of the dwarf Mime named Alberich. In Siegfried, Mime, who lives in a cave, brings up Siegfried so that he will kill Fafnir the giant. who is transformed into a dragon and now has the ring. Siegfried slays Fafnir with the invincible sword that Mime has fashioned, and kills Mime, who had intended to kill him after he had recovered the gold. The prophet stands on this stone and says, "This is the temple of the sun. This place is a vessel that collects the light of the sun." Elijah climbs down from the stone. His form becomes smaller in descending and finally becomes dwarf-like, unlike himself. I ask, "Who are you?" Quote, "I am Mime, and I will show you the well springs. The collected light becomes water and flows in many springs from the summit into the valleys of the earth." He then dives down into a crevice. I follow him down into a dark cave. I hear the rippling of a spring. I hear the voice of the dwarf from below. "Here are my wells. Whoever drinks from them becomes wise." But I cannot reach down. I lose courage. I leave the cave and, doubting, pace back and forth in the square of the yard. Everything appears to me strange and incomprehensible. It is solitary and deathly silent here. The air is clear and cool as on the remotest heights, a wonderful flood of sunlight all around. The great wall surrounds me. A serpent crawls over the stone. It is the serpent of the prophet. How did it come out of the underworld into the world above? I follow it and see how it crawls into the wall. I feel weird all over. How a serpent crawls over the stone? It is the serpent of the prophet. How did it come out of the underworld into the world above? I follow it and see how it crawls into the wall. What I'm getting at here is serpent as symbol of the mushroom. I'm not reducing the symbolism of the serpent to the symbolism of the mushroom, but the connection is that mushrooms break down rock and create soil. So the question of how did it come out of the underworld into the world above? Well, by eating rocks. I follow it and see how it crawls into the wall. It crawls into the wall. I feel weird all over. A little house stands there with a portico, minuscule, snuggling against the rock. The serpents become infinitely small. Mycelium. I feel as if I too am shrinking. The walls enlarge into a huge mountain, and I see that I am below on the foundation of the crater in the underworld. Then I stand before the house of the prophet. He steps out of the door of his house, and he relays something, but there's a footnote. In the 1925 seminar, Jung interpreted this episode as follows. The fight of the two snakes. The white means a movement into the day, the black into the kingdom of darkness, with moral aspects too. There was a real conflict in me, a resistance to going down. My stronger tendency was to go up. Because I had been so impressed the day before with the cruelty of the place I'd seen, I really had a tendency to find a way to the conscious by going up, as I did on the mountain. Elijah said that it was just the same below or above. Compare Dante's Inferno. The Gnostics expressed the same idea in the symbol of the reversed cones. Thus, the mountain and the crater are similar. The Gnostics expressed the same idea in the symbol of the reversed cones. Thus, the mountain and the crater are similar. There was nothing of conscious structure in these fantasies. They were just events that happened. So I assume that Dante got his ideas from the same archetypes. Maguire suggests that Jung is referring to Dante's conception of the conical form of the cavity of hell with its circles, mirroring in reverse the form of heaven with its spheres. In Ion, Jung also noted that serpents were a typical pair of opposites, and that the conflict between serpents was a motif found in medieval alchemy. In any case, we were dealing with what is the origin of the serpent. How did it come out of the underworld into the world above? I follow it and see how it crawls into the wall. I feel weird all over. A little house stands there with a portico, minuscule, snuggling against the rock. The serpents become infinitely small. I feel as if I too am shrinking. The walls enlarge into a huge mountain, and I see that I am below on the foundation of the crater in the underworld. and I stand before the house of the prophet. He steps out of the door of his house. I notice, Elijah, that you have shown me and let me experience all sorts of strange things, and allowed me to come before you today. But I confess that it is all dark to me. Your world appears to me today in a new light. Just now it was as if I were separated by a starry distance from your place, which I still wanted to reach today. But behold, it seems to be one and the same place. Elijah, you wanted to come here far too much. I did not deceive you. You deceived yourself. He sees badly who wants to see. You have overreached yourself. It is true. I eagerly longed to reach you, to hear more. Salome startled me and led me into bewilderment. I felt dizzy, because what she said seemed to me to be monstrous and like madness. Where is Salome? Elijah, how impetuous you are. What is up with you? Step over to the crystal and prepare yourself in its light. A wreath of fire shines around the stone. I am seized with fear at what I see. The coarse peasant's boot, the foot of a giant that crushes an entire city. I see the cross, the removal of the cross, the mourning, M-O-U-R-N, the mourning. How agonizing this sight is. No longer do I yearn. I see the divine child, with its white serpent in his right hand, and the black serpent in his left hand. I see the green mountain, the cross of Christ on it, and a stream of blood flowing from the summit of the mountain. I can look no longer, it is unbearable. I see the cross and Christ on it in his last hour in torment. At the foot of the cross, the black serpent coils itself. It has wound itself around my feet. I'm held fast, and I spread my arms wide. Salome draws near. The serpent has wound itself around my whole body, and my countenance is that of a lion. Salome says, Mary was the mother of Christ. Do you understand? I. I see that a terrible and incomprehensible power forces me to imitate the Lord in his final torment. But how can I presume to call Mary my mother? Salome, you are Christ. I stand with outstretched arms like someone crucified, my body taut and horribly entwined by the serpent. You, Salome, say that I am Christ? There's a long footnote, and I will read it. In the 1925 seminar, Jung recounted that after Salome's declaration that he was Christ, quote, in spite of my objections, she maintained this. I said, this is madness, and became filled with skeptical resistance. He interpreted this event as follows. Salome's approach and her worshipping of me is obviously that side of the inferior function which is surrounded by an aura of evil. One is assailed by the fear that perhaps this is madness. This is how madness begins. This is madness. You cannot get conscious of these unconscious facts without giving yourself to them. If you can overcome your fear of the unconscious and can let yourself go down, then these facts take on a life of their own. You can be gripped by these ideas so much that you really go mad, or nearly so. These images have so much reality that they recommend themselves, and such extraordinary meaning that one is caught. They form part of the ancient mysteries. In fact, it is such fantasies that made the mysteries. Compare the mysteries of Isis as told in Apuleius with the initiation and deification of the initiate. One gets a peculiar feeling from being put through such an initiation. The important part that led up to the deification was the snake's encoiling of me. Salome's performance was deification. The animal face which I felt mine transformed into was the famous Deus Leontocephalus of the, that's a man with the head of a lion, in the Mithraic mysteries. The figure which is represented with a snake coiled around the man, the snake's head resting on the man's head, and the face of the man that of a lion. In this deification mystery, you make yourself into the vessel and are a vessel of creation in which the opposites reconcile. He added, all this Mithraic symbolism from beginning to end. Sorry, all this Mithraic symbolism from beginning to end. In The Golden Arse, translated by Robert Graves, for example, The Golden Arse is a famous mythological text, I gather. Lucien undergoes an initiation into the mysteries of Isis. The significance of this episode is that it is the only direct description of such an initiation that has survived. Of the event itself, Lucien states, quote, I approached the very gates of death and set foot on Prosperine's threshold, yet was permitted to return, wrapped through all the elements. At midnight, I saw the sun shining as if it were noon. I entered the presence of the gods of the underworld, and the gods of the upper world stood near and worshipped them. After this, he was presented on a pulpit in the temple in front of a crowd. He wore garments which included designs of serpents and winged lions, held a torch, and wore, quote, a palm tree chaplet with its leaves sticking all out like rays of light. Jung's copy of a German translation of this work has a line in the margin by this passage. In any case, from the start of the Elijah says, how impetuous you are. What's up with you? Step over the crystal and prepare yourself for its light. A wreath of fire shines around the stone. I am seized with fear at what I see. The coarse peasant's boot, the foot of a giant that crushes an entire city. I see the cross, the removal of the cross, the mourning. How agonizing this sight is. No longer do I yearn. I see the divine child, with the white serpent in his right hand and the black serpent in his left hand. I see the green mountain, the cross of Christ on it, and a stream of blood flowing from the summit of the mountain. I can look no longer. It is unbearable. I see the cross and Christ on it in his last hour and torment. At the foot of the cross, the black serpent coils itself. It has wound itself around my feet. I am held fast, and I spread my arms wide. Salome draws near. The serpent has wound itself around my whole body, and my countenance is that of a lion. Salome says, Mary was the mother of Christ. Do you understand? I see that a terrible and incomprehensible power forces me to imitate the Lord in his final torment. But how can I presume to call Mary my mother? Salome, you are Christ. I stand with outstretched arms like someone crucified, my body taut and horribly entwined by the serpent. You, Salome, say that I am Christ? It is as if I stood alone on a high mountain with stiff outstretched arms. The serpent squeezes my body in its terrible coils, and the blood streams from my body, spilling down the mountainside. Salome bends down to my feet and wraps her black hair round them. She lies thus for a long time. Then she cries, I see light. Truly she sees, her eyes are open. The serpent falls from my body and lies languidly on the ground. I stride over it and kneel at the foot of the prophet, whose form shines like a flame. Elijah, your work is fulfilled here. Other things will come. Seek untiringly, and write, and above all, write exactly what you see. Salome looks in rapture at the light that streams from the prophet. Elijah transforms into a huge flame of white light. The serpent wraps itself around her foot, as if paralyzed. Salome kneels before the light in wonder-struck devotion. Tears fall from my eyes, and I hurry out into the night, like one who has no part in the glory of the mystery. My feet do not touch the ground of this earth, and it is as if I were melting into air. Footnote. On the Psychology of the Kore figure, 1951, Jung describes these episodes as follows. In an underground house, actually in the underworld, there lives an old magician and prophet with his daughter. She is, however, not really his daughter. She is a dancer, a very loose person, but is blind and seeks healing. This description of Elijah draws him together with the later description of Philemon. Jung noted that this shows the unknown woman as a mythological figure in the beyond. That means in the unconscious. She is soror or philia mystica of a hierophant or philosopher, evidently a parallel to those mystic syzygies which are to be met with in the figures of Simon Magus and Helen, Zosimus and Theosebia, Comarius and Cleopatra, etc. Our dream figure fits in best with Helen. And the next section begins with another footnote 213, which is the guiding reflection, which says, in Black Book 2, Jung copied the following citations from Dante's Commedia in German translation. Quote, and I to him, I am one who, when love breathes on me, notices, and in the manner that he dictates within, I utter words. And then, in the same manner as a flame, which follows the fire, whatever shape it takes, the new form follows the spirit exactly. Quote, my longing, the news of the desire revived by the mother, led me up to the overbright day, whose light is the opposite to the dark space of forethinking, the dark space of the primordial image. The opposite principle is, as I think I understand it, heavenly love, the mother. The darkness that surrounds forethinking, the idea or the primordial image. Appears to be due to the fact that it is invisible in the interior. It is invisible in the interior and takes place in the depths. And lives. Again, my longing led me up to the overbright day, whose light is the opposite to the dark space of forethinking, the dark space of the primordial image. The opposite principle is, as I think I understand it, heavenly love, the mother. The darkness that surrounds forethinking, the idea or the primordial image, appears to be due to the fact that it is invisible in the interior and takes place in the depths and lives. But the brightness of love seems to come from the fact that love is visible life and action. Love is visible life and action. My pleasure was with forethinking and had its merry garden there, surrounded by darkness and night. I climbed down to my pleasure, but ascended to my love. I see Elijah high above me. This indicates that forethinking stands nearer to love than I, a man, do. Before I ascend to love, a condition must be fulfilled, which represents itself as the fight between two serpents. Left is day, right is night. The realm of love is light. The realm of forethinking is dark. Both principles have separated themselves strictly and are even hostile to one another and have taken on the form of serpents. This form indicates the daimonic nature of both principles. I recognize in this struggle a repetition of that vision where I saw the struggle between the sun and the black serpent in chapter 5, section 5, Descent into Hell in the Future. At that time, the loving light was annihilated and blood began to pour out. This was the Great War. But the spirit of the depths wants this struggle to be understood as a conflict in every man's own nature. The draft continues. Therefore, they all say that they are fighting for the good and for peace, but one cannot fight one another over the good. But since men don't know that the conflict lies within themselves, the Germans thus believe that the English and the Russians are wrong, but the English and the Russians say that the Germans are wrong. But no one can judge history in terms of right and wrong. Because one half of mankind is wrong, every man is half wrong. Therefore, a conflict resides in his own soul. But man is blind and always knows only his half. The German has in him the English and the Russian whom he fights outside of himself. Likewise, the English and the Russian has in him the German whom he fights. But man appears to see the outer quarrel, not the one within, which alone is the wellspring of the great war. But before man can ascend to light and love, the great battle is needed. Since after the death of the hero, our urge to live could no longer imitate anything, it therefore went into the depths of every man and excited the terrible conflict between the powers of the depths. In December 1916, in his preface to The Psychology of the Unconscious Processes, Jung wrote, quote, "The psychological processes which accompany the present war, above all the incredible brutalization of public opinion, the mutual slanderings, the unprecedented fury of destruction, the monstrous flood of lies, and man's incapacity to call a halt to the bloody demon, are suited, like nothing else, to powerfully push in front of the eyes of thinking men the problem of the restlessly slumbering, chaotic unconscious under the ordered world of consciousness. This war has pitilessly revealed to civilized man that he is still a barbarian, but the psychology of the individual corresponds to the psychology of the nation. What the nation does is done also by each individual, and so long as the individual does it, the nation also does it. Only the change in the attitude of the individual is the beginning of the change in the psychology of the nation." This paragraph, for clarity, the realm of love is light, the realm of forethinking is dark. Both principles have separated themselves strictly and are even hostile to one another and have taken on the form of serpents. This form indicates the daimonic nature of both principles. I recognize in this struggle a repetition of that vision where I saw the struggle between the sun and the black serpent. At that time, the loving light was annihilated, and blood began to pour out. This was the great war. But the spirit of the depths wants this struggle to be understood as a conflict in every man's own nature. Since after the death of the hero, our urge to live could no longer imitate anything, it therefore went into the depths of every man and excited the terrible conflict between the powers of the depths. Forethinking is singleness, together. Love is togetherness. Both need one another, and yet they kill one another. Since men do not know that the conflict occurs inside themselves, they go mad, and one lays the blame on the other. If one half of mankind is at fault, then every man is at fault. Every man is half at fault, but he does not see the conflict in his own soul, which is, however, the source of the outer disaster. If you are aggravated against your brother, think that you are aggravated against the brother in you. That is, against what in you is similar to your brother. As a man, you are part of mankind, and therefore you have a share in the whole of mankind, as if you were the whole of mankind. If you overpower and kill your fellow man, who is contrary to you, then you also kill that person in yourself, and have murdered a part of your life. The spirit of this dead man follows you, and does not let your life become joyful. You need your wholeness to live onward. If I myself endorse the pure principle, I step to one side and become one-sided. Therefore, my forethinking in the principle, the prophet, the personification of the idea of the heavenly mother, right? Therefore, my forethinking, the prophet, the personification of the idea in the principle of the heavenly mother, becomes an ugly dwarf who lives in a dark cave like an unborn in the womb. You do not follow him, even if he says to you that you could drink wisdom from his source. But forethinking, the idea, appears to you there as dwarfish cleverness, false and of the night, just as the heavenly mother appears to me down there as Salome. That which is lacking in the pure principle appears as the serpent. The hero strives after the utmost in the pure principle, and therefore he finally falls for the serpent. If you go to thinking, the idea, take your heart with you. If you go to love, take your head with you. Love is empty without thinking, thinking hollow without love. The serpent lurks behind the pure principle. Therefore, I lost courage until I found the serpent that at once led me across to the other principle. In climbing down, I became smaller. Great is he who is in love, since love is the present act of the great Creator, the present moment of the becoming and lapsing of the world. Mighty is he who loves, but whoever distances himself from love feels himself powerful. In your forethinking, you recognize the nullity of your current being as a smallest point between the infinity of what is past and of what is to come. The thinker is small, he feels great if he distances himself from thinking. But if we speak about appearances, it is the other way around. To whoever is in love, form is a trifling, but his field of vision ends with the form given to him. To whoever is in thinking, form is unsurpassable and the height of heaven. But at night he sees the diversity of the innumerable worlds and their never-ending cycles. Whoever is in love is a full and overflowing vessel and awaits the giving. Whoever is in forethinking is deep and hollow and awaits fulfillment. Both love and forethinking are in one and the same place. Love cannot be without forethinking, and forethinking cannot be without love. Man is always too much in one or the other. This comes with human nature. Animals and plants seem to have enough in every way. Only man staggers between too much and too little. He wavers, he is uncertain how much he must give here and how much there. His knowledge and ability is insufficient, and yet he must still do it himself. Man doesn't only grow from within himself, for he is also creative. For he is also conscious. The God becomes revealed in him. The divine creative power becomes in him a personal consciousness from the unconscious collective. Human nature is little skilled in divinity, and therefore man fluctuates between too much and too little. The draft and corrected draft have. But why, you ask, does the idea, forethinking, appear to you in the guise of a Jewish prophet, and the pleasure in the guise of the heathen Salome? My friend, do not forget that I too am one who thinks and wants in the spirit of this time, and is completely under the spell of the serpent. I am just now through my initiation into the mysteries of the spirit of the depths, about to not entirely discard all the ancientness lacked by those thinking in the spirit of this time, but to readopt it into my being human, to make my life whole. For I have become poor and far removed from God. I must take in the divine and the mundane, since the spirit of this time had nothing else to give me. On the contrary, he took the little that I possessed of real life. But in particular, he made me hasty and greedy, since he is merely the present, and he forced me to hunt down everything present to fill the moment. Human nature is little skilled in divinity, and therefore man fluctuates between too much and too little. The spirit of this time has condemned us to haste. You have no more futurity and no more past. If you serve the spirit of this time, we need the life of eternity. We bear the future and the past in the depths. The future is old, and the past is young. You serve the spirit of this time and believe that you are able to escape the spirit of the depths. But the depths do not hesitate any longer and will force you into the mysteries of Christ. The draft and corrected draft has. Just as the old prophets, the ancients, stood before the mysterium of Christ, I also stand as yet before this mysterium. Insofar as I reassume the past, although I lived 2,000 years after him, and at one time believed I was a Christian, but I had never been a Christ. It belongs to this mystery that man is not redeemed through the hero, but becomes a Christ himself. The antecedent example of the saints symbolically teaches us this. Whoever wants to see will see badly. It was my will that deceived me. It was my will that provoked the huge uproar among the daemons. Should I therefore not want anything? I have, and I have fulfilled my will as well as I could, and thus I fed everything in me that strived. In the end, I found that I wanted myself in everything, but without looking for myself. Therefore, I no longer wanted to seek myself outside of myself, but within. Then I wanted to grasp myself, and then I wanted to go on again, without knowing what I wanted. And thus I fell into the mystery. Should I therefore not want anything anymore? You wanted this war. That is good. If you had not, then the evil of this war would be small. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, to redeem the past and to transform every it was into an I wanted it thus. That alone do I call redemption. Should I therefore not want anything anymore? You wanted this war. That is good. If you had not, then the evil of this war would be small. But with your wanting, you make the evil great. If you do not succeed in producing the greatest evil out of this war, you will never learn the violent deed and learn to overcome fighting what lies outside you. He said on February 11, 1916, in a discussion at the Association for Analytical Psychology, we abuse the will. Natural growth is subjugated to the will. War teaches us the will is of no use. We will see where this leads. We are completely subject to the absolute power of the beginning. Therefore, it is good if you want this greatest evil with your whole heart. The draft and corrected draft have, since we are inwardly still ancient Jews and heathens with unholy gods. You are Christians and run after heroes and wait for redeemers who should take the agony on themselves for you and totally spare you Golgotha. With that, we ourselves pile up a mountain of cavalry all over Europe. With that, we ourselves pile up a mountain of cavalry all over Europe. If you succeed in making a terrible evil out of this war and throw innumerable victims into this abyss, this is good, since it makes each of you ready to sacrifice himself. For as you draw close to the accomplishment of Christ's mystery, you already feel the fist of the Iron One on your back. This is the beginning of the way. If blood, fire, and the cry of distress fill this world, then you will recognize yourself in these acts. Drink your fill of the bloody atrocities of the war. Feast upon the killing and destruction, then your eyes will open. You will see that you yourselves are the bearers of such fruit. The corrected draft has, we called ourselves Christians, imitators of Christ. To be Christ oneself is the true following of Christ. You are on the way if you will all this. Willing creates blindness, and blindness leads to the way. Should we will error? You should not, but you do will that error which you take for the best truth, as men have always done. The symbol of the crystal signifies the unalterable law of events that comes of itself. In this seed, you grasp what is to come. I saw something terrible and incomprehensible. It was on the night of Christmas Day in the year 1913. I saw the peasant's boot, the sign of the horrors of the peasant war. Of murdering incendiaries, and of bloody cruelty. I knew to interpret this sign for myself as nothing but the fact that something bloody and dreadful lay before us. I saw the foot of a giant that crushed a whole city. How could I interpret this sign otherwise? I saw that the way to self-sacrifice began here. They will all become terribly enraptured by these tremendous experiences, and in their blindness will want to understand them as outer events. It is an inner happening. That is the way to the perfection of the mystery of Christ, so that the peoples learned self-sacrifice. In 1918, in his preface to the second edition of the Psychology of the Unconscious Processes, Jung wrote, "Spectacle, this catastrophe threw man back on himself by making him feel his complete impotence, and turned him inward. And with everything rocking, he seeks something that guarantees him a hold. Too many still seek outward, but still too few seek inward to their own selves, and still fewer ask themselves whether the ends of human society might not best be served if each man tries to abolish the old order in himself, and to practice in his own person and in his own inward state those precepts, those victories which he preaches at every street corner, instead of always expecting these things of his fellow men. May the frightfulness become so great that it can turn men's eyes inward, so that their will no longer seeks the self in others, but in themselves." The draft has, if this doesn't happen, Christ will not be overcome, and the evil must become even greater. Therefore, my friends, I say this to you so that you can tell your friends, and that the word may spread among the people. May the frightfulness become so great that it can turn men's eyes inward, so that their will no longer seeks the will in others, but in themselves. I saw it. I know that this is the way. I saw the death of Christ, and I saw his lament. I felt the agony of his dying, of the great dying. I saw a new God, a child, who subdued demons in his hands. I saw that a new God had come to be out of Christ the Lord, a young Hercules. I saw that a new God had come to be out of Christ the Lord, a young Hercules. The God holds the separate principles in his power. He unites them. The God develops through the union of the principles in me. He is their union. If you will one of these principles, so you are in one, but far from your being other. If you will both principles, one and the other, then you excite the conflict between the principles, since you cannot want both at the same time. From this arises the need. The God appears in it. He takes your conflicting will in the hand of a child whose will is simple and beyond conflict. You cannot learn this, it can only develop in you. You cannot will this, it takes the will from your hand and wills itself. Will yourself. That leads to the way. Extended footnote. A long passage occurs here in the draft and corrected draft, a paraphrase of which follows. The God holds love in his right, forethinking, the idea, in his left. Love is on our favorable side, forethinking, the idea, on the unfavorable. This should recommend love to you insofar as you are a part of this world, and especially if you are a thinker. Their unity is God. The God develops through the uniting of both principles in me or in you. I do not become God through this or become divine, but God becomes human. He becomes apparent in you and through you as a child. Some crossed out lines. The divine will come to you as childlike or childish insofar as you are a developed man. The childish man has an old God, the old God who we know and whose death we have seen. If you are grown up, you can only become more childlike. You have youth before you and all the mysteries of what is to come. The childish has death before him, since he must first become grown up. You will become grown up insofar as you overcome the God of the ancients and of your childhood. You overcome him. This is not crossed out anymore. You overcome him not through setting him aside, obeying the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist. The spirit of the time sways between yes and no like a drunkard, since he is the uncertainty of the present general consciousness. You, or one, one can only overcome the old God through becoming him oneself and experiencing his suffering and dying oneself. One overcomes him and becomes oneself as one who seeks himself and no longer imitates heroes. As one who seeks himself and no longer imitates heroes. You free yourself. One frees oneself, and when one frees oneself from the old God and his model, when you have become the model, then you no longer need his. In that the God held love and forethinking, the idea, in the form of the serpent in his hands, it was shown to me that he had seized the human will. God unifies the opposition between love and the idea, forethinking, and holds it in his hands. Love and forethinking, the idea, existed from eternity, but they were not willed. Everyone always wills the spirit of his time, which thinks and desires. He who wills the spirit of the depths wills love and forethinking. If you will both, you become God. If you do this, the God is born and seizes possession of the will of men and holds his will in his child's hands. The spirit of the depths appears in you as thoroughly childish. If you don't want the spirit of the depths, he is to you a torment. Willing leads to the way. Love and forethinking are in the world of the beyond, so long as you do not will them and your willing lies between them like the serpent. So long as you do not will them and your willing keeps them separate. If you will both, the struggle breaks out in you between willing love and willing forethinking, willing recognition. You will see that you can't will both at the same time. In this need, the God will be born, as you have experienced in the Mysterium, and he will take the divided will in his hands, in the hands of a child, whose will is simple and beyond being split. What is this divine childish willing? You can't learn it through description. It can only become in you. Nor can you will it. You cannot learn or empathize. You cannot learn or empathize it from what I say. It is unbelievable how men can falsify themselves and lie to themselves. Let this be a warning. What I say is my mystery and not yours, my way and not yours, since myself belongs to me and not to you. You should not learn my way but your own. My way leads to me and not to you. That was the extended paraphrase. Now back to the main text, which said, will yourself, that leads to the way. Will yourself, that leads to the way. But fundamentally, you are terrified of yourself, and therefore you prefer to run to all others rather than to yourself. I saw the mountain of the sacrifice, and the blood poured in streams from its sides. When I saw how pride and power satisfied men, how beauty beamed from the eyes of women when the great war broke out, I knew that mankind was on the way to self-sacrifice. The spirit of the depths, the great spirit, has seized mankind and forces self-sacrifice upon it. Do not seek the guilt here or there. The spirit of the depths clutched the fate of man unto itself, as it clutched mine. He leads mankind through the river of blood to the mystery. But in the mystery, man himself becomes the two principles, the lion and the serpent. He leads mankind through the river of blood to the mystery. In the mystery, man himself becomes the two principles, the lion and the serpent. Because I also want my being other, I must become a Christ. I am made into Christ, I must suffer it. Thus the redeeming blood flows. Through the self-sacrifice, my pleasure is changed and goes above into its higher principle. Love is sighted, but pleasure is blind. Both principles are one in the symbol of the flame. The principles strip themselves of human form. Both principles are one in the symbol of the flame. The principles strip themselves of human form. There's an extended footnote there, which I will read after I just finish this, which reads, the mystery showed me in images what I should afterward live. I did not possess any of those boons that the mystery showed me, for I still had to earn all of them. And then another footnote. Finis, part 3, end of part 1. I will now read the two remaining footnotes, which are rather long for completeness. So the principles strip themselves of human form. A long passage appears here in the corrected draft, a paraphrase of which follows. Some sections, a few of them crossed out. As you saw how pride and power filled men, and how beauty streamed out of the eyes of women when the war gripped the people, you knew that mankind was on the way. You knew that this war was not only adventure, criminal acts, and killing, but the mystery of self-sacrifice. The great, the spirit of the depths, has seized humanity and forced him through the war to self-sacrifice. Do not seek the guilt here or there. Guilt doesn't lie outside. It is the spirit of the depths who leads the people into the mysterium, just as he led me. He leads the people to the river of blood, just as he led me. I experienced in the mysterium what the people were forced to do in actuality, which happened outside on a large scale. I did not know it, but the mysterium taught me how my willing laid itself at the feet of the crucified God. I wanted Christ's self-sacrifice. The mysterium of Christ completed itself in front of my eyes. My forethinking, the idea standing above me, forced me to this, but I resisted. My highest desire, my lion's, my hottest and strongest passion, I wanted to rise up against the mysterious will to sacrifice, self-sacrifice. So I was like a lion encircled by the serpent, an image of fate eternally renewing itself. Salome came to me from the right, the favorable side. Pleasure awakened in me. I experienced that my pleasure comes to me when I accomplish the self-sacrifice. I hear that Maria, the symbol of love, is also my mother, the mother of Christ, since love has also borne Christ. Love brings the self-sacrificer and self-sacrifice. Love is also the mother of my self-sacrifice. In that I hear and accept this, I experience that I become Christ, since I recognize that love makes me into Christ. But I still doubt, since it is nearly impossible for the thinker to differentiate himself from his thought and accept that what happens in his thought is also something outside of himself. It is outside him in the inner world. I become Christ in the mysterium. Rather, I see how I was made into Christ, and yet am completely myself, so that I could still doubt when my pleasure told me that I was Christ. Salome, my pleasure, said to me that I'm Christ, because love, which is higher than pleasure, which, however, is still in me hidden in pleasure, had led me to self-sacrifice and made me into Christ. Pleasure came near to me. encircled me in rings, and forced me to experience the torment of Christ and to spill my blood for the world. My willing, which earlier served the spirit of this time, zeitgeist, went under to the spirit of the depths. And just as it was previously determined by the spirit of the time, it is now determined by the spirit of the depths, by forethinking of the idea and pleasure. It determined me through the willing of self-sacrifice and to the spilling of blood, my life's essence. Mark that it is my bad pleasure which leads me to self-sacrifice. Its innermost is love, which will be freed from pleasure through sacrifice. Here the wonder happened that my previously blind pleasure became sighted. My pleasure was blind, and it was love. Since my strongest willing willed self-sacrifice, my pleasure changed. It went into a higher principle, which in God is one with forethinking. Love is sighted, but pleasure is blind. Pleasure always wants what is closest, and feels through the multiplicity, going from one to another, without a goal, just seeking and never fulfilled. Love wants what is furthest, the best and the fulfilling. And I saw something further, namely that the forethinking in me had the form of an old prophet, which showed that it was pre-Christian and transformed itself into a principle that no longer appeared in a human form, but in the absolute form of a pure white light. So the human relative transformed itself into the divine absolute through the mysterium of Christ. Forethinking and pleasure united in me in a new form, and the willing in me, which appeared foreign and dangerous, the willing of the spirit of the depths, lay paralyzed at the feet of the shining flame. I became one with my will. This happened in me. I just saw it in the mystery play. Through this, much was made known that I didn't previously know, like in a play. But I found everything doubtful. I felt as if he was melting in the air, since the land of the mysterium, that spirit, was still foreign to me. Capital M Mysterium. The Mysterium showed me the things which lay before me and had to be fulfilled, but I did not know how and when. But that image of the sighted Salome, who knelt in rapture before the white flame, was a strong feeling that came to the side of my will and led me through everything that came after. What happened was my wandering with myself, through whose suffering I had to earn what served for the completion of the Mysterium I had seen. The second footnote, which is shorter. Giles Quispel reports that Jung told the Dutch poet Roland Horst that he had written psychological types on the basis of 30 pages of the Red Book, cited in Euler, the Gnostic Jung, and the Seven Sermons to the Dead. It is likely that he had in mind these preceding 3 chapters of the Mysterium, namely the chapters entitled Resolution, Instruction, and before that, Mysterium Encounter. Oh. What is presented here develops the notions of the conflict between opposing functions, the identification with the leading function, and the development of the reconciling symbol as a resolution of the conflict of opposites, which are the central issues in Chapter 5 of Psychological Types. The type problem in poetry, Chapter 5, yeah. In his 1925 seminar, Jung said, I found that the unconscious is working out enormous collective fantasies. Just as before I was passionately interested in working out myths, now I became just as much interested in the material of the unconscious. This is in fact the only way of getting at myth formation. And so the first chapter of the psychology of the unconscious became most correctly true. I watched the creation of myths going on and got an insight into the structure of the unconscious, forming thus the concept that plays such a role in the types, psychological types. I drew all my empirical material from my patients, but the solution of the problem I drew from the inside, from my observations of the unconscious processes. I've tried to fuse these 2 currents of inner and outer and inner experience in the book of psychological types, and have termed the process of the fusion of the 2 currents, the transcendent function. And have termed the process of the fusion of the 2 currents, the transcendent function. that being the 13th chapter, and completion of the first volume of the Red Book entitled, well, first volume is entitled Liber Primus, and the chapter section titled Resolution.